But as David correctly stated, we have out of roughly 35 million acres of federal land, we have interspersed about 2.5 million acres. In other words, we got sections 16 and 36 out of every township, and many of those are surrounded by federal lands. And so in my opening remarks, I talked about good neighbors. Good neighbors, for instance, on my ranch, if my neighbor happens to entertain Canadian thistle, no disrespect, Ambassador, but if, or some other noxious or invasive species, quite frankly, the local government can come out and spray that and then charge that person for not eradicating those endangered species themselves. In our forest lands, whatever those may be, not endangered species, pardon me, noxious and invasive species, they become fine fuels. 1,400 lightning strikes is not out of the ordinary in Idaho in a summer. And those fine fuels then, without attention on our neighboring federal lands, have ladder fuels because the brush that continues to grow can ladder up into the bigger trees with a wildfire. And so what I would like to see, and I'm going to engage the other governors in this, what I would like to see is a good neighbor policy. In many cases, it's the federal land right next door to me that becomes the seed treasure and repository for these invasive and noxious. Now, in some cases, because of a wilderness designation, it becomes mechanically and chemically almost impossible to manage those. But they're still there. And so the school kids in Idaho that count on $32 million a year for the billion-plus school budget, their assets become endangered. Twofold. Number one, we lose the productivity of the land. Number two, we also lose the assets that we could have harvested off that land and generated income. And so, Doc, you and I discussed a lot of this when we were on the Resources Committee together. We passed the Forest Health Act in 2005, taking into consideration the impact that we have on the local assets and the state assets because of our federal ownership. And so I'd like to hear your response to that. Harris, we talked about this in Las Vegas last winter. I know I'm beating the same drum again, same song, second verse, perhaps a little bit louder, a little bit worse. Jen can attest to that. And then Dave, you know that we've tried very hard to consolidate. In other words, take these two sections per township and trade the federal government for 10 sections someplace else so that our land management is then focused on 6,400 acres instead of 640. And these land exchanges, which would be valuable to both of us, are very, very hard to engage. And so